can you help us understand what your concerns are here? And again, this is all, their whole book's written about this, but if you can understand, it really is the fundamental, this is really the fundamental question to get through the difficult patches in a negotiation, is to try to understand. And a lot of times, if you understand what their concern is, you realize that that's where you find middle ground, actually. That's where you come up with workarounds. Because again, your inner engineer, summon your inner engineer and find the workaround. And obviously, the more deals you do, the more workarounds you already know, or the more ways you have of going about it. But a lot of times you'll hear things, you'll get information from the other side that will help you solve the problem. Asking them, can you help us understand what your concern is? Or, what are you worried about here? A lot of times, we'll, especially in legal documents, you'll see very strict and very somewhat what I would consider aggressive risk allocating clauses that just don't really make any sense. And if you find out what the concern is and you realize it's just not as black and white as what they think it is, you can carve out what it is that they're concerned about and everybody goes away happy because it's not much of a risk for you. So what are you worried about? And then the obvious one, which is one that you should never, ever be embarrassed about when you realize that you're pretty far apart. Can you work with us to help find some middle ground here? The question that I often ask is, especially with people that I with who negotiate with on most of the deals that I do, are people that tend to negotiate a lot of deals for their company. And I'll say to them, I know that we're not the first customer who's pushed back on this point. Do you have any, how have you dealt with this in the past? Or do you know what the right workaround is? Or that kind of thing. Don't be embarrassed to ask them, do you have any ideas for middle ground that we can find here? We can't be the first customer who's pushed back on this, or whatever. Okay, so the next, and this again is just sort of a variation on what I said before, framing your own pushback. Can you help us understand why this is reasonable? Can you help us understand, or where they're asking for something that's very non-standard in a situation, in a deal where there really are norms in your industry for how you're going to deal with a particular point, help us understand how the situation is different. And a lot of times, sometimes we'll just get, well, we always insist on this, or this is just our policy, our company policy. Now, this is one a lot of times, if I'm not making any progress on this one, this is sort of this is kind of when I bring out the big guns. This is one of my favorite questions to ask, which is a variation on this, but where it really will drive home to the person on the other side in a way that will will probably make them a little bit uncomfortable for reasons that I'll tell you, and it's okay for them to be uncomfortable about this. One of my favorite, this is actually what I say. I actually wrote it out here. This is what I actually say. I actually say, okay, we negotiate dozens of these deals, or however many of these deals. We negotiate deals like this all the time. And you are the first vendor. I usually do a lot of inbound service agreements. You are the first vendor to insist on this. I'm going to have to escalate this, and I'm going to have to escalate. And sometimes I'll mention they will pretty much know who it is that I'm going to escalate. I'm going to have to escalate this, and I can be sure that the person that I have to raise this point with is going to ask me, what is their problem? Why should we agree to this? How are they different from everybody else? Why is this reasonable? So I'm asking you, I say to the person on the other end on the other side of the conversation, so I'm asking you, what am I going to tell Joe Smith when he asks me that question? Now, the reason it's going to make this person uncomfortable is that person's probably going to be aware that Joe Smith is the VP for whatever is most important in this deal, and that Joe Smith or Josie Smith or whoever, Joe Lynn Smith, is probably a decision maker who will may actually be a gating factor in future deals. And this guy on the other end of the telephone is not really going to want to have his company viewed as unreasonable. And a lot of times you'll get, once you ask them that, tell me what I'm going to tell them to persuade them, or maybe we need to set up a meeting between you and that person to explain to them why you and not any of our other vendors, require this particular point. It works. I'll tell you, it works. All without exception, the point will be taken off of the table. They'll come back the next day, conceding without a single word. Actually, that's been my experience, actually, where the next day, okay, we escalated internally. It's okay. We can do it. Here's another little trick. This is another little trick, and this is where your listening skills really come in. If somebody in a negotiation ever says, "I'm sorry, I can't agree to that," the key word in that sentence is "I." Okay, so the next question you ask is, all right, well, you can't agree with it, but surely there's somebody in your company who can agree to this point. Who would that be? And you know what? Actually, sometimes the answer very simply comes, oh, I would have to escalate this to Susie Smith, who is, basically the manager or the director or the VP. Can we set up a meeting with Susie? I'll get back to you on that. And generally, you don't have to set up a meeting with Susie because Susie gives the authority. So when you hear, I can't do that, find out who can. Yeah?
I just had this crazy situation where I was basically having to get something big from people who didn't want to give it to me.
Right.
And it was this exact same situation, and I did reverse my strategy with that going in. I thought, okay, with this one woman that I'm talking to, what if I get to know and she says I can't do anything? That was exactly my question. I said, I understand that you're not the final decision maker, and that's great. Can you tell me who is,
Yeah.
and would it be possible to speak with him or her? And then I took it a step further, which was really helpful because I had to do this with like 5 different people. I said, okay, I understand that you're not the final decision maker. However, do I have your support for my case to the final decision maker? So then I went and I repeated that with like 3 or 4 of the main decision makers. So then when I got to kind of the person that was doing the final word, I said, okay, I've got this person's support, this person's support, this person's support. And theoretically, these people were my adversaries. And I tried to go take the tack of turning them into advocates.
That's such a great idea.
To get what I wanted. So,
Well,
like
you
you
know
said,
what,
it was number 1, finding out who the decision maker was, and then number 2, getting the person's support who wasn't the
Right.
decision maker.
Right.
Saying, will you advocate on my behalf to the decision maker?
Exactly. And
And I got
remember,
what I wanted, which was great.
the reason you're in a conversation with them is that they want to do the deal, right? They want to do the deal. Sometimes, if the person who's the ultimate decision maker, the person who's the ultimate decision maker is really, really busy. And a lot of times, they don't want a meeting. They just want them to know that it's been vetted. And a lot of times, and the other thing that you can do is there any way that I can help you make the case to that person? Is there something that we can do? I mean, there's been a lot of information about the value that's going to be added, or about the prospects, or what's going to happen, or all the benefits to everybody for doing it. Is there something that I can do? What kind of information does Susie Smith need in order to say yes? Can I help you with that? Great suggestion. Really great suggestion. So, remember, there's usually somebody, when you hear, I can't do that. I mean, sometimes, though, it's incredibly easy. Sometimes it has been incredibly easy. All right. So the next point has to do with a language thing. And by the way, there's a book that I read. First of all, I'm pretty much, believe it or not, I was a lawyer for all these years as a trial lawyer, so I got pretty comfortable. I've gotten pretty comfortable with speaking and making arguments and dealing in adversary situations. But in terms of the actual sort of what you do in negotiations, I am largely self-taught. And just from doing it and from having a pretty good business sense and a fair amount of confidence, just generally, that I can kind of do anything. But anyway, I read a book when I first switched over from being a litigator, a commercial litigator, to as I was transitioning into doing more of a transaction practice in the late 90s. Well, first of all, I had negotiated a lot of settlements, which is sort of an in-between kind of area where you're looking for solutions. I read a wonderful book called A Woman's Guide to the Language of Success. It's not just about negotiating, but it's about the types of things. It's by a woman named Phyllis Mindell. I don't know if it's still in print. I think she actually wrote another book that was with a different publisher. But Phyllis Mindell, really, really great. Anyway, the way that you present things, yeah.
Can you repeat the name?
Yes.
Please?
It's called A Woman's Guide to the Language of Success. A Woman's Guide to the Language of Success. And she has, it's actually a tremendous book, and everything that she says in it is really great. So, we're going to talk about preparing for the tough questions, which I guess is, did I switch forward an extra one? Let's see, maybe I pushed forward. Anyway, looks like I might have gone extra. Framing your questions. Oops. Dealing with pushback. Framing your pushback. Prepare for the tough questions. Okay, so yeah. That's the problem. I pulled the thing off. All right. All right. So again, I spoke to you before about rehearsing, about preparing your responses to the tough and important questions. Here is an important fact about what most people do when they're talking in a situation in which they're either uncomfortable or in which they feel, I'm not going to say that somewhat on the defensive, or when they are being pressed to communicate something they don't want to communicate. A lot of times when people, for a lot of people, silence is very uncomfortable. It's just, silence is uncomfortable in a normal social interaction. You talk, you expect somebody to say something back. A lot of times in a negotiation, and this is actually train yourself to do this, you don't really want to, a lot of the times you don't really want to, you want to let people talk. You want to let them talk as long as they will. But you also, because they may give you a lot more information, or you may be able to detect certain things about their perception of the argument they're making. But never forget that silence is okay. Say what you need to say, and then just shut up. Okay? Just stop talking. And you've been in these situations before where someone is arguing to make a point, and they just go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Just be quiet. Just stop talking. And actually, one way that you can make yourself stop talking is after you have made the point that you need to make, simply stop talking and ask the most obvious question, what do you think? And then keep your mouth shut. And if it is quiet for a little while, that is perfectly okay. But a lot of people are uncomfortable with silence, and as a result, they tend to talk to the point where they actually back off. That happens a lot in negotiations, where people will back off, or where they will admit that there may be a problem with a point that they're making, or they may start offering their fallback positions simply because they're so uncomfortable with silence.